the question I sort of wanted for you, like getting into that point of getting into ownership and, not moving away from being an athlete, you're still on the boat, but was that structure of, dedicated races, different parts of the world, having that assurity of, it is now a commercially viable sport. Was that something that, when you went out to find investors and look to have people invest in the sport, did that make that pitch easier, even though it was still a relatively new idea to a lot of people you were pitching to?
Yeah, it's been well documented. I, kind of failed at the America's Cup, twice trying to get there, but I learned a ton along the way, and spent a lot of time thinking about and focused on the commercial side of the America's Cup and trying to put a team and compete. And, it's been a 180 with what we have.
Very happy to welcome Mike Buckley. He's the co-owner and CEO of the US SailGP Team. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Sean. Really excited to chat with you today.
Not a problem at all. I always start by asking people how they got their start in the world of sports business. I'll ask you the same thing. How'd you get your start in the world of sport and sports business, but also sailing?
Yeah, I think on the sailing side, I kind of got into it probably not the normal way growing up in it. I got to go to boarding school with what I thought was going to be, maybe the start of my hockey or football career, and turned out I wasn't very good at either of those. And that school, Tabor Academy, had an amazing sailing team. And I kind of saw the kids that did it, and they walked around and talked about how great it was, and it made me want to try it. And after my freshman year of high school, I signed up for some rec sailing classes and really fell in love with it. And it's given me gave me an education, and it's shown me the world. And as I got older in my kind of professional competing career, I wanted to take a step into the management side, the ownership side. It's really hard to scale yourself as an athlete, and that's a scary thing as you get older in your career. And I watched some of these other athletes, really famous athletes like LeBron James and all the different businesses he's created, and what he's doing off the court in the communities and his world of business. And SailGP was being built kind of on the side, and became undeniable not to pay attention to. And I guess kind of a lot of my dreams came true November 2023 when Ryan and I acquired the team.
So to go a little bit back before that, pre-SailGP, you were sailing and sort of working your way, I guess, up the ranks and sailing around the world. How do you sustain that? How do you become an athlete in that space and support what you want to do?
Yeah, I think like anything else, it's a grind, right? If you want to get to the top of whatever it is, you're doing, you got to be all in. And I spent, 15 years traveling the world, sailing 250, maybe some years almost 300 days a year, and it's a grind. You're never satisfied with your results, and whether you win or whether you get your butt kicked, you always want to get back to it the next day and try to improve. And I've always enjoyed working, and I love competing, and sailing's been my outlet to do that. I feel very, very fortunate to have been part of a lot of really great teams and met a lot of fantastic people along the way, people that I would have never crossed paths with, never been in a room with if it wasn't for the sport of sailing. But this is kind of a turn in my career, and to be around the very best sailors in the world and SailGP and a lot of great minds, and to be able to buy a thing from Larry Ellison is something I'll never forget as long as I live.
So talking about that thing, SailGP, for those who don't know, founded in 2019. I mean, my experience, knowledge of sailing comes from way back when America's Cup as an Australian, and Australia 2, the wing keel. And for those who don't know that, that backstory in the history of sailing, check it out. Untold is a really good doco on Netflix. It sort of tells that, and I remember that as a young kid. Our Prime Minister actually told everyone to take the day off when Australia. So there's a real connection to the sport. But explain, how do you go about explaining to people who might be in sailing or not even in sailing or in the world of sport what SailGP is?
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. I did some media yesterday with Barstool, and they brought up the same thing, right? And where the America's Cup was in the 80s, and it was mainstream, right? What Dennis Conner did for the sport of sailing has really never been seen before, and he brought a whole country here in America together around a small little sport like sailing. What the America's Cup kind of has lacked is, consistency, right? What's really unique and beautiful about the America's Cup is when you win, you control all the rules for the next one. that makes it really hard to be a challenger, and because you don't know what's going on, right? It makes it really hard to go out and find sponsors. Only a few teams have been successful with that, right? Grant Dalton and Team New Zealand have been very successful, but a lot of the other teams struggle to get sponsorship, because when you walk into a CMO's office, they first thing they say to you is, "Oh, where's the race going to be?" And when you respond, "I don't know," they look at you like you have 10 heads. And then they ask you,
Yeah.
"When's the race going to be?" And you say, "Well, I don't know that either." And then they look at you and say, "Well, how did you get this meeting with me?" And I think, Larry Ellison and Russell Coutts went through that very successfully. And I think, they saw that the writing was on the wall, that we needed to make our sport, to get to the next level, it needs to be commercially sustainable. It needs to be always on, like every other sports league in the world. And yeah, in 2019, they brought that to fruition. Now when you're able to walk into a CMO's office, they might not say yes to you right away to a sponsorship deal, but at least you can say, we have 14 races around the world, from Abu Dhabi to New York City to Sydney, Auckland, and all over Europe. Here's where it's going to be. Here are the teams. You at least have a chance, right? And SailGP brings sailing closer to the fans. Also, it also brings the fans closer to sailing, right? Which is a win for all of us. Who doesn't like to go to a waterfront city anywhere in the world and be around the ocean, the sun, hopefully some nice wind, good temps, and see foiling catamarans ripping around at 60 miles an hour.
Absolutely. And I think the question I sort of wanted for you, like getting into that point of getting into ownership and, not moving away from being an athlete, you're still on the boat, but was that structure of, dedicated races, different parts of the world, having that assurity of, it is now a commercially viable sport. Was that something that, when you went out to find investors and look to have people invest in the sport, did that make that pitch easier, even though it was still a relatively new idea to a lot of people you were pitching to?
Yeah, I mean, it's been well documented. I, kind of failed at the America's Cup, twice trying to get there, but I learned a ton along the way, and that, spent a lot of time thinking about and focused on the commercial side of the America's Cup and trying to put a team and compete. And, it's been a 180 with what we have, with the US SailGP team and SailGP as a whole, right? I just spoke to James Vowles, the principal of Williams, and we kind of talked about the introduction of the salary cap, or the spend cap rather, in Formula One. We have the same thing in SailGP. And what that created was investable businesses, both for teams in Formula One and SailGP teams. And, when you can just dump as much money as humanly possible at something, someday the person who controls that spend wakes up and says, "What the heck are we doing? We've spent how much? I'm not interested in this anymore." And so it's unique in sport to have a spend cap. And so, yeah, we went about it very differently in the America's Cup, which I love and have enormous amount of respect for. It's very much focused on patronage for most of the teams. A wealthy individual who loves sailing and wants to put some money behind it and go try to win. SailGP is predominantly corporately funded and will eventually be 100% corporately funded. There's no expiration date, right? The US SailGP team will go on far beyond my lifetime, right? And the New York Knicks at the end of the season, they don't shut off, right? They will start playing at the end, at the beginning of next season, and that's what SailGP's brought. And I think you see that from the proof is kind of in the pudding, I guess they say, with our investor group, right? We were able to bring private equity in on our transaction. That's a first, right? Because it's an investable business. And what's unique about it is, that you have a $10 million spend cap, and, we know that we can get there with sponsorship. And so everything above that 10 million comes back to the investors and the owners. And we also like that there's an enormous amount of fan engagement, and there's a rev share on, TV broadcast. And currently that rev is zero. And so we like that gap is opportunity. And as soon as some of those TV deals start to get renewed, and they, with our fan engagement on TV, all of a sudden there's going to be real revenue. And so investors like that as well.
And from that investor base, there's always that take of there's good money, and then what comes with that money. Have you also been looking at like who are those investors, whether they be, private capital firms or people that want to get into sports ownership and team ownership, and they bring a set of skills and knowledge that's potentially just as valuable as the check that they're handing over?
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I went into a meeting 6 years ago with McKinsey and Company, and when I left, they said to me, "Let's show the world that diversity is a competitive advantage." And I'd never heard it said like that, and I use it every week now. And diversity can mean as many things as you want it to mean. It doesn't need to be politically charged or anything like that, right? And the way that I think about it is, it's a competitive advantage to bring a bunch of people together that think differently, that look differently, that are different, right? That's how you're going to get a good product. It's one thing if you want to put your best friends in a box and you all think alike, and you all yes each other to death, you're going to have a really average product. But, what Ryan and I have been able to assemble, very lucky to be able to do this is, a lot of people that bring different skills, right? Avenue Capital, they own 15 sports properties, right? They've due diligence over 1,000 teams and leagues around the world. So we get the knowledge of, what's market, what's not, what are they doing in NASCAR? What are they doing in soccer? What are they doing in golf? Not only what are they doing in the PGA Tour, but what are they doing in TGL, two totally different golf properties, and how we can, learn from what they're doing. And then, we have a number of celebrities, right? And, what Issa Rae is doing in Hollywood and with her production companies and her advertising agencies. How can we learn from that? How can we, capitalize on what she's doing? We have a phenomenal board with Lindsey Vonn and DJ Khaled, right? I mean, what Lindsey's done on a mountain around the world, she's obviously one of the best of all time at what she does. We can learn from her, how she's prepared her body and her mind competing, but also, she's probably, I don't know what the exact percentage is, but I'm going to guess it's a very large number of the reason that skiing is popular in America, right? She made skiing a mainstream. And so, yeah, I mean, there's kind of can go down the list. Ryan, my partner, he wrote the code that, is on every one of our phones, in the Uber app, right? So you start to have access to all these really brilliant people that think differently. And now all of a sudden you can start to push some boundaries. And yeah, it's awesome.
So we're talking about this, your life and your current life outside the boat, but you're still racing. Tell us a little bit more about what your role is on the boat.
Yeah, and so I guess when we acquired the team, we wanted to be able to, I wanted to be able to have my hands on how the team operates, right? Like what the inner workings of a SailGP team. And I thought, the best way to do that is from the inside. And my sailing career is not going to last forever. It's coming to the end. But when I get off the boat, I wanted to be able to, from experience, understand how important the communication is, how important the teamwork is, how important the timing is, the feel and things like that, so that when you're behind, on the pit wall and you've got a headset on, you can essentially be in their shoes and communicate as such. On the boat, I'm the strategist, and what that is, I essentially call the race to the rest of the team and, kind of navigate our 50 through traffic, other F50s, look for the most amount of wind that we can kind of, head towards and hopefully go faster than the other boats. And then in all the maneuvers, there's typically two people required for each role in the maneuver because the boat is so wide. As people run to the other side, when you turn from one tack to the other, somebody has to drive. And so there's two steering wheels, there's two flight controller modules, and there's a flight controller module on the wheel as well. And so we kind of talk about it like an orchestra. When, Taylor and I decide that we're going to turn, there's a call that goes out, stand by or whatever, and that alerts everybody to go to their, next thing. I'll run to the other side first, we turn, and then I drive while Taylor runs across, and you kind of verbally and literally hand off your role to, kind of your partner in whichever kind of area of the boat. So you'll hear on the comms, I'll say my wheel. That means I'm driving, and that's Taylor's cue to run across the boat. And then he'll say my wheel, and he'll say my rake, which is the basically a flight control term.
Yep.
And when he says that, then Hans knows that he can take his hands off the flight controller and run to the other side. I think there's like 37 functions that happen in 1 second, something like that, in the course of the maneuvers. So you can imagine that's it's very complex, and we're still learning, how to do it properly. But yeah, it's a lot of fun.
It sounds like it. It must make your race weekends. We're recording this just before a race in New York. It must make your race weekends action packed, both like in the boat and then also outside the boat, whether it be talking to sponsors and partners and checking in with investors. What does your race weekend look like?
My race weekends are probably in kind of big markets or, I don't know, 18 to 20 hours, a day. But it's, I always think about my mom worked 3 jobs when I was a kid, for most of my life.
Mm-hmm.
She never complained, never heard her complain one time. I never saw her take a day off. I never saw her feel sorry for herself. And, she worked a lot of jobs that were, a lot harder and a lot dirtier than what I do. So, I kind of always come back to when you love what you do, it's not work. And yeah, it's like, it's a privilege. I get to go and race an F50 during the day. And then, at night, I get the opportunity to go to dinner or whatever it may be with, investors or partners or potential partners, like I get to do this podcast with you. Like that's a privilege. There's not a lot of people in the world that get to do what we get to do. And I try to never lose sight of that. And, I usually wait till Monday or Tuesday to be absolutely wiped. But the weekends, they fly by.
Absolutely. I mean, we've had a few guests on, especially around those major tournaments, whether it's be an Australian Open, 2 weeks of solid tennis, or Olympics, and one of the phrases or even a hashtag is sleepers for the week. Like just for those 3 or 4 days of that 2 weeks, you just power through. Like you said, it's a grind, but it is absolute privilege.
Yeah, I don't, I don't want to come off as like I'm some like crazy tough guy. I'm not. I'm not any tougher than anyone else. But I don't feel tired at race weeks, right? It's just like the kind of just natural adrenaline is just, yeah, it's exciting. Every day is a little bit different, and you're always going to wake up and there's going to be some new problem. I mean, that's the biggest misconception in kind of owning your own business. You get to make your own schedule and this, that, and the other. Like that's about the most untrue statement ever. You wake up and there's just some new thing, and there's no one to deal with it but you. But that's what makes it exciting.
We've already sort of touched on that there are a lot of similarities with Formula One, with SailGP. The speed, the global races, the growing popularity, and you've already mentioned the cost cap and how it's helped make it sustainable in that, and then you don't have that race to the bottom with owners spending more money and making it a hard business. But it also must make your day-to-day business hard, because you've got to watch every dollar that goes out the door and make decisions on that. How does, I guess, the cost cap sort of sharpen your focus on every cost that goes out the door?
Yeah, well, every dollar matters, and you have to be, really careful about how you spend money. You have to be really careful with how you manage expectations of, the different departments on our team and the people that work for us. Everybody wants to spend money in their area, right? Like as you would expect. Our head coach Evan wants to, put money towards performance and off-season training. And our head of hospitality, Alta, she wants to put money towards making sure our hospitality looks premium, so our partners are, and you have to balance. And there's no right answer, right? We need our performance to increase. That's a fact, but we also need happy and more commercial partners, right? And so ideally everything's happening kind of at the same time. But yeah, it's tough, and you have to be willing to say no. We can't spend money on that, and sometimes that's a hard pill to swallow for everybody. But the nice thing is everybody knows we have a cap, right? We kind of split our business in two, essentially. We've got the sailing and kind of then the marketing and entertainment side of our business. Everybody knows that we have a $10 million spend cap, and that's the deal.
And it also must, I guess, I mean, sport is known for creating a lot with a little and outproducing their performance with a limited resource. It must be really, people must both value it, but also really strive for it to stretch that dollar further, over deliver with what they've got, and must really, I guess, help the team from a performance point of view, whether it be in the boat but also outside the boat.
Yeah. Again, it's really, really hard to run a business on 10 million and the people. So the people that you surround yourself with and the people that work for, any brand in the world are the most important part of, the whole thing. They're the heartbeat. We can't operate without our people. And you have to find people that believe in your vision, that are willing to kind of come and temporarily work for less. You've got to find people in their life cycle that are, kind of just on the come up. You can't go out and find the most seasoned, whatever position it is, right? Because there has to be some give and take. And I'm a New England Patriots football fan, and I have been for a long, long time. And when they were, in their heyday with Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, they were notorious for spreading the money across all the players, right? They had very few superstars, right? And Tom Brady played for less than, I don't know the exact number, but I think like substantially less than any of the quarterbacks that were remotely in the kind of the top group. And that money was able to be spread around to other players. They didn't have a ton of big name players, right? I mean, there were years where their receivers, they won a Super Bowl, or Troy Brown was playing receiver and playing defense, right? And then you look at other teams and they've given all their money to their quarterback or whoever, and they can't afford any other players, and that's tough to win. I don't know what the perfect mix is, but that's kind of what I think about.
But also long term, I mean, success of SailGP and the league overall, and like you said, new revenues coming in, whether they be from broadcast deals and league sponsorships and more interest, then hopefully, the cost cap will be adjusted as the league and the sport grows.
Yeah, I think the cost cap is in there so that everybody's competing kind of on a similar playing field, and I think secondly, so that all the teams are commercially sustainable and hopefully profitable. And I think once you see that, I mean, the natural thing to do would be to increase, but I don't think we're in a rush to do that. From a team perspective, we don't really have a say. 1/12th of a say or 1/13th of the league as well. But even if it was up to us, I'm not sure we'd want to increase it yet. We want to see ourselves and all the teams be as prosperous as possible and grow kind of at the right pace.
Absolutely. Well, one of the areas we work in with sports is helping develop fan bases, especially via digital and social. What are you guys doing in conjunction with SailGP to help grow and develop that fan base?
Yeah, I mean, there's no magic answer. You've got to you have to have a compelling value proposition, right? There's kind of a misconception that the fans will just show up, right? There needs to be some value exchanged, right? Whether that's, whether that's like a souvenir or whether that's like an emotional connection, right? It's still some level of a value, something being exchanged, right? Whether fans typically either love you or hate you, either one is a fan. You obviously would rather the love than the hate, but some of the areas that I think that we'll see a lot of growth in the next few years is storytelling around athletes, around key people. What we've seen happen with Formula One is with Drive to Survive, at least here in the United States, the introduction to the personalities behind Formula One, whether that be Toto or Christian or Zach or Daniel Ricciardo's smile or Max's killer instinct and, what Lewis is doing on and off the track, right? All those things, most Americans had no clue about Formula One, right? And I know it's been a thing overseas, but here it really never was. And now all of a sudden, everybody, it doesn't matter how young, how old, man, woman, whatever, Formula One is kind of top of mind. So one area that we've kind of been the first into is on the fan engagement side. We did a deal with Fan Capital, which is, essentially a fan engagement agency. So they work with us to build an app and build storytelling around our people and kind of ensure that we're always on telling a story. Before we were kind of randomly posting things, and now we're trying to weave a story, good, bad, or in between, every day of the week. And our metrics have done a 180 since we brought them on, right? Things like sweepstakes and giveaways and, capturing first party data, all of this was kind of bootstrapped before, and now we're doing it professionally. And, I don't know if you've watched what they did with Williams F1, but they took Williams F1 from having the most amount of fans because Williams has been around forever, but also the least engaged fans on the grid. In 12 or 14 months, they went from last in fan engagement to third in fan engagement, right? That's a huge jump. And what that did was open the door for new partners. Suddenly, they had one paying partner 2 years ago. Now they have 14 or 15, including a title. So fan engagement is a major aspect to bringing on new partners.
Absolutely. I mean, those in sport, and myself included, would have seen, some of those social clips, one showing the boat, showing the speed, but then I think, that helmet off thing, which is a phrase that they use in the NFL to sort of say, hey, take the helmet off so people can learn who the players are. I think it's a definite trend across sports, and once you start following the different players in the sport and understanding a bit of the behind the scenes stuff, it sort of gets you a bit more invested. So you're starting to draw fans in from a social content and storytelling point of view, and you sort of talked about watching the sport. Is there a misconception that you can't watch a SailGP race because it's out there in the bay, or what's it like? What's a race weekend like for fans?
Well, again, what I started with is, SailGP has brought the racing close to the fans close to the racing, so now when people come to a race, whether you're in the grandstands, whether you're kind of in standing room only, or whether you're in the hospitality or out on a power boat or sailboat, you're right in it, right? You're in some of the venues. It's very easy for us to crash into, the hospitality or the land that's kind of holding the hospitality or the grandstands up. And, each venue's different. And I think time will tell, but I'd like to see, and I think this will happen authentically, but I'd like to see each venue kind of have its own identity, right? I like to think about the Kentucky Derby or Art Basel or the Super Bowl. Like people go to these big events, Ultra Music Festival, what else? Wonderland or whatever the big DJ thing is in Europe. Like a lot of the time, it just becomes an excuse to get a bunch of people together, right? And each one of them has its own identity. I'd love to see Saint-Tropez be the last super yacht event of the Mediterranean super yacht season, right? Where all the super yachts come September, October before they head to the Middle East or the Caribbean and stop to watch the SailGP race, right? You're never going to get 100,000 people there. The town is too small, but you could get 200 mega yachts or 300 mega yachts, and it could be like St. Bart's New Year's Eve. I think New York can be that. Here in New York, a lot of people go out to the Hamptons for the summer in a week or two, but the spring is so beautiful in New York City. The New York Grand Prix can be that like first weekend of summer before kind of, the who's who disperses to the Hamptons. And, so I think you could kind of, Auckland, was just, the fandom there is like nothing, any of us have ever seen before in our sport, right? It's and you probably know what that looks like. And you go out to dinner, people want to take photos with you. At Auckland, New Zealand, sailing is in their blood. So that should be like a very sailing, racing forward, identity, right? With mass fandom. Australia is not too far off of that. So I think, the game day experience is a little bit different for each venue, but I'd love to see those identities start to take shape, so that people can kind of, back to what we started with the America's Cup versus this, people can put our races on their calendar and kind of know, first weekend in June, like, yeah, you going to SailGP next year? Like, yeah, that was awesome, right? That's where I'd love to, get the people in their big hats, like the Kentucky Derby, whatever the thing is, right?
Yeah.
And it's just an excuse to get a bunch of people together and have fun.
And it becomes that fan escalator piece. I mean, that the eventualization of sport in big events, like you said, like you want people to be putting on their calendar and saying, yes, I'll be in Sydney next year, or, oh, next year I'm going to go over to Auckland because it's close by, or but sort of set their calendar around it. Like, I know what the experience is. And then from that, you go, I'm going to tune into what's happening in New York, even though it's on the other side of the world. And that's the global opportunity you have to make that real strong connection with someone at an event, and sort of lock them in and become one of those fans that love you, and are cheering against other teams, and sort of get some of that rivalry that you might know, as a Patriots fan.
Yeah,
that must be really exciting.
Yeah, no, it is. And I mean, right now the rivalries are starting to, pick up in SailGP. And, I think forever, a lot of sailors have kind of been trained, a lot of people outside of SailGP have worked for high net worth individuals racing their boats or America's Cup or whatever it is. And, kind of you're told to just kind of lay low, right? Don't make a scene or whatever. And
don't rock the boat, maybe.
Don't rock the boat, and now we need some more people rocking the boat, right? And you look back to what the legendary America's Cup drivers, they rocked the boat back then, right? Russell rocked the boat, Dennis rocked the boat, right? All these all these people rock the boat, and that was a big part of their personalities, and that was before social media, right?
Yeah.
They were larger than life, and I think the last 30 years we kind of got away from that, and now we need the people that some people love, the people that hate. We need the boring person, we need the funny person, we need the whatever it is, but make a thing out of it.
Absolutely. And I think, we talk a lot about fan metrics of, how many fans you're growing and what you've got on social and who's viewing. One of the fan metrics I like is sort of the avidity of fandom is, when you come up and you see a fan it's got a tattoo of your team logo on it, which, there's lots of fans with, Pats fans with tattoos. And it's like, it shows their level of fandom. They're at the top of that fan escalator. You've got them for life. So maybe that's another metric you put on the board with, more people coming up and saying, hey, I've got a USA SailGP tattoo. Is that?
I went to a PBR event at Madison Square Garden. PBR is Professional Bull Riding League, and Avenue Capital owns the New York Mavericks team, and I got to go into the team hotel and hang out with the team and all that. And they had they had an activation they were doing was they were doing live tattoos in the hotel, right? To what you're saying, right? The fandom in PBR is just unreal, right? So yeah, when people are willing to, take a chance on a lifelong tattoo for you, that's when you know you've made it, I guess.
Yeah, I had Stephanie Rogers from the Las Vegas Knights when they were in their early form. They had the same thing, a tattoo activation, which says, "Hey fans, you're going to lock in. Are you with us?" And
Yeah.
it's a nice way to sort of get that, not just social proof, actual proof.
Maybe we should set up a free tattoo parlor in our New York race. See if we can get any takers. It could be a
Well,
good fan engagement in itself.
I look forward to seeing the photos if it does come through.
You go first.
I'm still a clean skin. I think I will remain a clean skin. Tattoos aren't my thing. And there's probably a few other teams that I've been following for most of my life that are probably in front of the queue right now. I want to get to the Sports Geek closing five. Mike, do you remember the first sports event you ever attended?
Yeah, probably a Boston game.
At Fenway, beautiful place to watch a game of baseball.
At Fenway, yep. When tickets were like, I don't know, $5-10 for a grandstand seat.
Yeah, absolutely. You would have been a lot of different sports events. Do you have a favorite food memory or a go-to food at a sports event?
Go-to food. I mean, there's nothing like a hot dog at Fenway Park. Nowadays, you go to MSG and you can get just about anything. You can have a 5-course meal there. Or the Barclays Center. I'm gonna give you two answers. There's nothing like a hot dog at Fenway Park, and there's nothing like a carbone dinner at Barclays Center, watching an NBA or WNBA game.
Very good. That's exactly right. The food game definitely has changed over the years. Owning and running a global sports team like US SailGP, you're obviously in constant contact with a bunch of people all the time. What's the first app you open in the morning?
First app I open in the morning is my email. Second is probably my Instagram.
There you go. It's always a case of, like you said, you're running your own schedule. I was like, no, I don't run my own schedule. I run my business. It just throws stuff at me that I have to tackle every day. Is there someone that you follow? It might be someone in the sailing space, or it might be someone that's currently one of your investors that the listeners should be following, and why?
Hard to narrow it down to one person, but I love a comeback story, so I think people should follow what Lindsay's doing on the slopes, coming back, after a knee replacement, getting on the podium at a World Cup event this year. A lot of people doubted her, but the lesson there is doesn't matter what anybody thinks as long as you believe in yourself. So yeah, I think that's going to be a hell of a story to watch coming up to the Olympics.
Absolutely. If I quote Rudy Tomjanovich, never doubt the heart of a champion. I think if you're going to be following Lindsey Vonn in that comeback. Lastly, and you can answer this both personally and from a US SailGP, what social media platform is your MVP?
I would say, well, I think we have the largest presence on TikTok on the team side, not too far behind with Instagram. I think for me, my most important platform is probably LinkedIn. I actually really enjoy kind of bouncing between athlete and executive and watching a lot of the stories and innovations that are going on in, kind of big business around the world. It took me a long time to get onto LinkedIn. I think I've only been on it like for a couple of years, but yeah, to be able to kind of, have some sort of a back and forth and connection with what's going on in the world of business, world of sport, entertainment, that's something I actually really enjoy.
Absolutely. I mean, it is one that I give advice to athletes because, again, when you are an athlete, you do have the opportunity to meet a whole bunch of different people. You actually don't know where those connections will be, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. And so, we don't use business cards anymore. Like LinkedIn is effectively our business card. So it does become quite valuable to say, yep, let's connect, because you actually don't know how hard someone is following, your story, what you're doing. You might, and I'm sure you've got that experience now where people are reaching out or connecting and saying, hey, Mike, I've been following your story for the last 18 months. I want to talk. You being able to share some of that on your LinkedIn is most likely pretty vital in building out your network.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. And, I think the biggest message on social media, and sometimes I'm not great at this, but just consistency, right? When people see when people see you're consistently posting and telling a story, they're going to interact with you. If you're random, they're probably not. But it's not always easy. But, to have you want to feel like you want to have the right and the best content before you put it out there. But Gary Vaynerchuk's one of our investors, and he's a social media expert, star, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
He just consistency. DJ Khaled, same thing. Consistency. It kills every time.
Yeah, that and like you said, that being you, because there is that pressure of athletes going, I'm looking at other athletes that are doing amazing jobs or telling this. It's like, no, if you're just there's no lies there.
You got to be authentic. You have to be authentic in, really in everything you do, but anything publicly facing, if you're not authentic, they're going to see right through you.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, thank you very much. You mentioned LinkedIn. Is that the best platform? I always ask the listeners to reach out to guests and say thank you if they enjoyed the episode as much as I did. Is LinkedIn the best place for people to reach out and say thanks?
Yeah, sure. They can reach out on LinkedIn or Instagram. Instagram's just Buckley, my last name. Either or. Yeah, I'd love to hear from you. And Sean, thank you for having me. I really, really enjoyed chatting with you today. We got to get you out to a race sometime soon.
Yes, I do. I do want to. Tom Halls, who is one of the Sports Geek alumni now, runs the social for SailGP. So we're trying to make sure that maybe Sydney or Auckland, or if I'm in the same part of the world at some point, to catch up. But yeah, I'd love to check out a race in real life.
Yeah, would love that. Tom's the man. So yeah, would love to host you. Can't wait to get back down to your neck of the woods, kind of first of the year.
Cheers, mate.
Awesome.